Hello, friends. I'm very excited to be here with Krista, who's a fellow colleague, licensed clinical social worker, and healer, and so many other things. And we're going to be talking about mood cycle and moon and sun and all different kinds of things. Darcy, can you read her bio for us?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. I am honored to introduce Krista Day-Gloe today, LCSW, author and founder of Healing Roots Wellness Center. Krista bridges the body and mind as one integrated system, helping individuals and clinicians alike understand how physiology and psychology work together to shape mood, behavior, and healing. Krista speaks on hormones, eating disorders, and nervous system regulation, offering body-led strategies that empower both clinicians and clients. She is the author of Mood and Moon, a body-led guide for cycling bodies and body-led mental health. Known for her relatable analogies, Krista makes science accessible, practical, and deeply human. So we're going to get into those topics and more in the conversation today. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Michelle.
Yay! Getting my candles lit. I'm creating the ambiance. um, all right, Krista. So where do we start? Like, where do we even want to go with this today? Why don't we talk a little bit about what got you into this kind of focal point with women's cycles
Yeah,
and helping them and helping support them in connecting with that.
Yeah, awesome. Um, I think I'll back all the way up into the idea of I've always known I was going to be a social worker. Like this was like my tried and true. My mom was basically a social worker, and it was just part of what I always envisioned myself doing. And then I got to college, and the social work department just didn't show up. Was part of this, and then everyone's like, "But you should become a nurse. You'll do better there." And so for a hot minute, I let people kind of sway my decision, and I went to nursing school for a hot second, which by the way was like a very bad decision. Very quickly, I was like, guys, I'm not gonna be a good nurse. You're gonna say 5 ml and then be like 5 cc. Like that's close enough, right? Like I'm not a precision type of person. I see the kind of forest through things. And so I learned very quickly that I'm not a nurse. I did not like biology, chemistry, all those classes, but I loved physiology. I got obsessed with physiology when I was in that class. And I was like, okay, maybe I could do nursing if I could just do this. And I was like, no, no, this still isn't my cup of tea. I'm going back to social work. I went and did all of my bachelor's, master's, and license in social work eventually. But what stuck with me is that my brain always likes to see patterns, and it sees patterns within social justice issues and social work, or within the ways that I see now as a clinician, how patterns show up in people with anxiety or patterns show up with people with disordered eating. And a couple years ago, I was working in a functional medicine clinic, and I was working with this amazing functional nutritionist, Jess. Give her a little shout out. She works in Colorado, and she and I just started really understanding how to support our clients in this physiological way, with her as a functional dietitian around food, and me as an eating disorder clinician, and understanding a little bit more holistic space around food and its impact. And this is where she really then educated me at the beginning around how our cycles, especially for those, I'm going to try and use the words around estrogen dominated brains, for those that maybe are assigned female at birth or maybe taking those hormones, or testosterone driven brains, and those might be more what we are going to say is like male or assigned male at birth. And she started really helping me see the impact in our cycle. I ended up moving back here to Kansas City, and COVID hit, and we were still working together with some clients, and we did a webinar series together around this. And so during that webinar series, it's her talking a lot and me asking her kind of interview questions around how these things work. And so we've got that on both of our websites if anyone wants to get deeper into that. It's during COVID, it's during like a Zoom conference call kind of thing, but it's really great. And so I learned a lot about that. And since then, since around 2020, it's been just these last few years as a clinician and as a cycling body, understanding and learning how impactful our hormones are to our mood, to the ways that we see things in the world, towards our behaviors. And so as we were building this webinar, I know I'm sure I could go back and watch it myself and find when I said, and someday I'm going to write a workbook, because when I teach my clients, it's a lot of information that we were never taught about. And so since then, I've really been working on creating a workbook. And I think I was just telling you right before this, it's in like the 90% stage of almost being ready. I feel like I see it a lot, but it's been a lesson in patience for me to learn the process of things. And learning the seasons of things relating to understanding how much, especially for our 28-day cycling folks, versus our 24-hour cycling people. And there is a lot of information that we can look on both sides of whether we're somewhat more of what we were talking about, like the more focus on like the sun, right? We have a 24-hour cycle with very predictable, and we can look at the sunset and kind of know how things are going to be, versus maybe for those cycling bodies and the estrogen dominated bodies for more of like a lunar cycle is what we can also start understanding ourselves in. So that kind of gives maybe a gist of where I know that's a lot, like you said, and
Yeah,
where to
yeah.
begin.
Um, I'm just curious about the importance of understanding the cycle on people's perspective on body image. You had mentioned that a couple times,
Yes.
and
It's incredibly impactful. I get a little bit astonished that we have not just shown people our hormone cycle. Am I able to share on screen here? I wonder how long it's going to take me, my image on my computer.
I would, yeah, I would rather
So
you
what
do
I would maybe say is
that.
in the footnotes here, maybe I will give you an image of the 28-day cycle. So what we can talk about is I'm going to back up real quick and I'm going to say we do have a 24-hour cycle with our testosterone driven bodies. And I do want to just kind of like give a caveat before we move on, because the 28-day cycle is a lot more intense, but the 24-hour cycle does impact our eating behaviors and our body image in different ways. Let's even come back to, so the 24-hour cycle, we're going to have an increase of cortisol and testosterone around 2 a.m. and it's going to rise up and it's going to dip around 10, 12 noon, and that's going to slowly decrease. And the next day, it's going to rise again around 2. And this is where even for 24-hour cycling bodies, we might have better body image in the mornings because we have more cortisol. Our brains are more active, they're more energized, versus at the end of the day, maybe it's not because we ate XYZ, or we didn't go to the gym because we were stressed. Maybe it's actually because our testosterone is coming down and our cortisol levels are coming down. And so body image distress might even get worse for those 24-hour cycling bodies. So I wanted to make sure that we give that before we get into the complex body image of the 28-day cycle. Because the 28-day cycle, we can break it down into sections where the way that Jess taught me, the way that she remembers is we've got the follicular, which is first, and luteal, which is last. So those are our two main phases. And then we've got like menstruation is at the very beginning. This is where some people will get a little confused. Like, what is day one? And day one for us bodies that are in a typical lunar cycling body, that's going to be the day that we start bleeding. That's going to be day one. That's going to be part of encapsulated in that follicular phase. And so when we look at the image here, things are kind of like smoothing out, actually. Some people, their mood is actually going to feel a little bit better whenever they start their cycle. We might be bleeding, we feel uncomfortable, we're bloated. So, like, yeah, our mood might not feel great then. But when we kind of look at this image that we'll have posted here, we're going to see like our hormones are actually kind of like riding all kind of like pretty mellow in this part. And what then happens is what we're going to see is estrogen starts kind of rising during this time. When estrogen, I want us to think of like it's kind of like our like confidence boosting, like feel good, like girl, like you should like that dress that's sitting in the back of the closet. Like as estrogen comes in, she's like, you should wear that. Like when we get to the middle of the month, this is where another part is where we're going to get to ovulation. This is where we're going to have like a peak of estrogen. We're going to have a peak of luteinizing hormone. This is when an egg is released. I think biologically there's a reason for this. Our bodies are like, hey, this is a fun time in our bodies. This is when our sex drive might go up. During this time, we actually have a bump in testosterone. And so this is where our sex drive is going to go up during this time, during ovulation. And this is when we're going to have probably pretty good body image. If body image, maybe we don't have great body image still, but maybe we're going to feel a little bit better about ourselves. Maybe we're not going to, then what we're going to see when we follow this image is the next part. Jess really educated me around is that she calls this divorce day. And I think a lot of functional medicine people use this term. There's a lot of X's, like estrogen is dropping and luteinizing hormone is dropping, and then progesterone is shooting up during this time. And there's just a lot of X's during this time. And this is where a lot of people actually don't know about the like intense mood shifts that can happen during this time. It's around anywhere from like day 17, day 22, or we might like backdate it to like 10 days before we start our cycle again. So this might be like day 18 if we're a 28-day cycle person. This is when we're gonna back a little bit. We're gonna see a whole bunch of X's right before this. So this is where we jokingly call divorce day. This might not be if we're in a relationship. We might want to divorce things like our work. We may like, our boss and our coworkers just driving us up the wall at this time. This is where a lot of our hormones are just kind of haywire at this time. So this is also where body image. We might have been like, oh, I felt so good this weekend. Let's say day like 16 lined up with Saturday. Like we felt really good. We went on a date. We dressed really nice. We felt like our partner was seeing us. And then like somehow on Monday, we're like, nothing fits. Like, oh, why does like these points, like, oh, just nothing right? Like, and this is where some of us can get confused because a lot of us were educated about PMS. This was gonna be like day 25 to day 28, when also hormones are dropping kind of off the chart at this point. And so, like, we know a lot of us are like, oh, we're more hungry, we feel a little crabby, but a lot of us weren't educated about this like hormonal shift when we get to the luteal phase. So this luteal phase is where like body image might stay not great. And this is where we're also going to have progesterone is it's really cool in a lot of ways. Progesterone kind of like makes our GABA in our body, which the way I like to describe is kind of like our natural Xanax. It's like, oh, kind of like chills. And so you would think that we'd be more chill during this time. What it also does, it kind of messes with our bowels. It also messes with our glucose. And so we actually are more hungry during this time. It kind of just regulates the insulin and glucose. And this is where I'm not going to get into the details again. I'm not a nurse, so I'm not going to like give all the specifics of all that. That's where like I have some in my workbook and we can go into the details if we want to. But really, what I want to focus on body image wise is like follicular. We're going to actually feel like if we have some good body image days, we're going to maybe feel a little bit better here. And luteal phase, I just want us to kind of have maybe some understanding like, yeah, we might not feel as good in this phase. And this is where I think body image, when we kind of can predict this, versus a lot of us are like, why do I just like want to only wear sweatpants today? It's not right before my period. Why do all of a sudden like, oh, I just feel so bloated or something shifts because the progesterone spikes. And so maybe our digestion gets messed up. So like maybe like we do not fit into the same pair of pants, maybe the same way that we actually did 10 days ago. And so like our body will shift. I was trained by Carolyn Costin. And I remember her saying once in a group setting to a group of women, you know, if we have a hose and that hose is empty, it's going to weigh a certain amount. If that hose is filled with water, it's going to weigh a certain amount as well, right? It's still the same body, but like it depends upon water retention, the different ways that our bodies are holding onto nutrients during this time. And so this is where when we are working again with our more science-based people, like our dietitians, this is where we can also start having our dietitians help adjust our meal plan even. Hey, we actually do need to maybe not have the same meal plan throughout the entire month because maybe we also will learn a couple days when we kind of all been told, oh, that PMS time, when all of us have been told, oh, like we might crave chocolate. Again, this is a glucose dysregulation. We have a dysregulation in our insulin glucose. And so things that feel dissatisfying, I am somebody with ADHD. And so I like to eat the same things over and over and over again. I call them my anthem meals. And it's just something I've done since I was a kid. And before I understood this about myself, I had this great steak salad, let's say, for one of my anthem meals. And one week, like that great steak salad for lunch felt fantastic. I felt so satisfying. And then all of a sudden, like next week, it wasn't as satisfying and I wanted more. Or like I wanted to go back and like I was craving chocolate. And if it wasn't a couple days before my period, my brain wouldn't have made sense with that because, right, in diet culture, we're supposed to eat the exact same thing and have the same meal plan and be as hungry as we were as our sun counterparts. Because let's come back to every single day, we can predict when the sun rises and when it sets. The lunar cycle, we can predict how much she might be showing in that cycle. She's still there, right? Let's go back to the moon doesn't, it's not like, oh, she like slides away part of herself, right? Like we just can't see her and part of that. And so this is why I also use the moon. My workbook is called Mood and Moon, right? Because it is something that we are still ourselves, but we might portray ourselves differently during that time. And so maybe back in the day, we were maybe we did sync with the moon. For some people, when we are synced, and back in the day, we do have a lot of data. We have a lot of information around maybe if we aren't in cell range, if we're not on, some of the things back in the day, we might start our cycle around the new moon. And when we might be having our divorce day, might be the full moon, which I think is the like we know something, right? And ERs go up and all of these things. And I do think that we are synced still in some of these ways. Maybe it's not exactly the full moon. Mine will kind of come maybe a couple days before I'm within the new moon. My perimenopause likes to throw a ringer in there every once in a while and mess with that. But what we can do is we can kind of see, oh, during this phase of the moon last month, I also wasn't feeling so great about body image. That makes sense because, oh, I'm in my luteal phase. And oh, yeah, I remember that the luteal phase. I don't actually feel, you know what? Like in my workbook, when I talk about body image, I'm like, yeah, let's lean into the sweatpants. Let's lean into the comfy clothes during that time. And let's listen to our bodies a little bit more versus like maybe during the beginning of the month we did have more confidence and we wanted to wear maybe the more tight fitting clothes or we felt like we wanted to go out like this is when we go to mood the same kind of things in the follicular phase we have more confidence maybe this is whenever I write my blogs, this is when I work on my workbook, this is whenever I feel really good when I'm going to like my workouts at the gym. This is when there's a lot of things. If I can also understand, man, I need to rest a little bit more. I'm not as motivated at the end of my cycle. I don't feel as good body image wise. That party I said yes to in my follicular phase, I don't actually want to go now that I'm like day 24. If I had known that, maybe I just wouldn't have planned that and been like, yeah, I don't want to go. But ask me, again, 2 weeks from then, let me know if you've got something going on because maybe I know my social battery is higher during that time. And so the more that we can predict, um, again, with physiology, I go back to I really like to educate my clients. And now I'm really excited about getting to educate not just my clients, but more people with my workbook and also clinicians. Is I think that the more we understand about what's going on, it just reduces shame. And then that shame reduces behaviors that are trying to suppress that shame, like disordered eating behaviors, substances, whatever thing that we can't figure out why do I feel so different when society tells me our sun cycling testosterone driven brains when they go on a diet, right? Like they lose weight all of a sudden. We're like, well, I'm doing the same thing as my husband. How come I'm not? Well, yeah, like you're not supposed to eat the same thing every single day as we are over here. And this is where we start comparing ourselves. And our society is set up for our 24-hour sun cycling society versus our 28 lunar cycle to be able to say, actually, I want to work less the last couple of weeks of work. Like, can you imagine if we were just like, yeah, I'm getting ready to start my cycle. I'm just gonna go take a, vacation for the last week. Like that would be amazing. Like times used to do this. We even have actual cultural norms that sometimes people do this. They leave during this time. Even within Judaism, there are still some practices where we still leave during this time because we know that there are things that we might go inward about. Maybe this is where we want to do deep therapy work with some of my clients because we are a little bit more introspective, or maybe we're really trauma, we're like we've got some like triggers to trauma. And so doing this work, if our clinician knows where we're at in our cycle, maybe this is not when we do EMDR. It depends on where we're at and what's going on, but this is where we can plan a lot of things.
So I want to pause for a second because I'm thinking, like, as you've been talking, for the listener that's like, okay, this all sounds interesting, but like this seems like a lot of work. Like I don't even know what day I'm on right now, but I guess I do want to start listening to my body and figure things out. Like
Mhm.
what would be a good entry point so there's not this like overwhelm?
Overwhelm is
Yeah.
just starting to track.
Mhm.
Um,
How
I
would
just got
how would they do that?
So, I mean, I think there's all sorts of apps, right? Like there are so many different apps that are out there. And I feel like, I could promote the one I take or the ones but I just feel like there's apps after apps. There's a really cool new one that I was like, oh, it's the one I wanted to make. And it like moves with the moon and it has like, it looks so pretty. I can't remember what it was called, but lots of different apps. Like it doesn't even take, like, we don't have to do it, like get a calendar. And just this is where we might just like circle like and put like a frowny face on October 20th. Like, ugh, I don't know why. I just like wasn't feeling good. So like it can be very basic. This is why I've created my workbook is I feel like this is something that we as just a society lack education. And like I said, I'm very excited to not just work with my individuals, but to educate people more so that this is something that eventually, once this version is done, I will be adapting it for teens because I want to teach this to our younger girls so that eventually this is just how we were taught. For those of us that haven't, this is where my workbook comes in of like it hopefully will break it down into chapter by chapter of giving us a little bit of information and then some reflection of just like pausing for a little bit. And then my tracker, it's 3 months for us to see over time. So on our trackers, like in our apps and things, we will see, and sometimes our trackers and our apps will even alert us like, hey, you said you were fatigued last week or last month during this time. How do you feel today? And it'll like prompt you to even check in to see if you're feeling similarly. What I'm hoping to help is give a tool that like we can take to our doctors, to our clinicians, to put on our fridge and for our partners to see. Um, I was in a couple of session and it was just I wish it was like I had recorded it because it was the most priceless thing. I feel like it was I just yeah, I wish it had been recorded because I was like, hey, we were talking about things and I was like, hey, you're on a 24-hour cycle. Have you ever seen the image of this? And like, so I have very common, like I bring this image and let us all see what it's like. He was like, what? Like, oh God, like he was like appalled and like he was like, oh my gosh, like you every month that like it go and like he was like, it's daunting when we first see this image. Like you said, it's a lot. Like it's so much. And why haven't we been given this image? Is a whole other question that we could go into in a whole other podcast. But the fact is that the more that we just look at it, right? So maybe I'm hoping that my tracker, eventually my graphic design, we're still working out. I'm hoping it can fit on the fridge. I'm hoping it can be something that like maybe even, we talk about with our kids, like, mom is, I'm today, like, I'm feeling really energetic. Like, let's do that craft. Or maybe it's like, hey, you know what? Mom's in this part of my cycle where, like, I'm more into like let's watch a movie together and cuddle on the couch. Do you think we can save that craft for next week? I know mom's a little bit more predictable next week of like having a little bit more energy. Like, there's a lot of things that we can do. I lost maybe track of the question that you might have
Yeah,
just,
no, it was I was just kind of landing the plane and going, okay, how do we practice like
yeah.
how
Where do we start?
and you
Yes.
talked about the apps and then even the links to the moon cycle, which I know a lot of people are becoming more curious about.
Mhm.
It sounds like you're linking that again to the apps. Like there's apps that will
There's
actually
apps that will do this as well. There's a lot of things that are, we could go into AI and ask AI to help us track this. But I think really it's more of just starting to pay attention to your body because maybe our body is a 30-day cycle. Maybe it's a 26-day cycle. Maybe we're in perimenopause, menopause. I will definitely pause here and say, I have so many folks that have had hysterectomies, full hysterectomies, and we can still track cycling. I will tell you that um, just like in the movie Inside Out 2, we have a little teenage kiddo that the alarm bell starts going off. That is hormones. The hormones start clicking on more, and we have more cycles. That maybe we're not menstruating even yet, but maybe we are already starting to cycle. And so the more that we just start paying attention to our patterns, and it can be looking at the moon and figuring out and looking at the cycle, but I do think it doesn't have to be super complex because it's intuitive. Because what I will tell you is that once we actually start tracking, it's like, oh well, I already knew that I acted. Yeah. I already knew that I didn't actually sleep better this time. Like it starts to become something that doesn't, it's not so external from us. It is something that I think we all were given. And I think it's more about like um, we're coming back to like this knowing and understanding about ourselves that we've always kind of known, but we've been told that we're supposed to be predictable, like this 24-hour cycle, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's so empowering versus some of the messages that a lot of us received about kind of bulldozing, like just kind of toughen up and it's just what it is. Versus actually it has a lot of information on how we can be better versions of ourselves depending on the cycle, where we're at.
Mhm.
I think you spoke to the eating disorder world or disordered eating or women with body dysmorphia. Like this could be a powerful element in their healing, and being able to understand what their body's doing in their cycle and how that could be impacting how their body's reacting, losing weight, gaining weight, feeling bloated, their emotional well-being during the month. Um, I think that's, I mean, really, really important. It's almost like a question every therapist or coach or healer could ask, like, where are you at with your cycle today?
It's something that like I feel a little bit like a broken record sometimes, and I'm like, should I ask again? Because it is something that I do. I ask all the time with my clients, and the clients that I have that have been with me long enough will be like, oh my gosh, I was at work the other day and I was gonna like, oh my coworker, and I had one client that was like, and I just went to my locker and I like looked on my app, right, it was just there, and she was like, it was day 18, and she was like, just walk away and like maybe talk to them on Monday. And it wasn't because, I mean, it was probably the weekend. We had some distance from the coworker, right? Like there was probably, it's not all hormones. There are so many other things, right? Like I don't want to just say it's all hormones and that's everything that we're, but there's a lot of other external things, right? It could have been on a Friday and then to the Monday. But if we just waited that time to also know, it's not that my feelings aren't true on day 18. But there is a lot of like energy inside that maybe if I journaled during that time and I thought about, is this about my coworker or is it because my coworker is reminding me that like, he talked down to me and he made me feel smaller than or less than and not good enough. And that like really gets to me. And like, is it going to be that if I just like come back at him with a snappy thing, or is it like, is it about like we can work more through what's going on if we also understand what is this feeling trying to tell us? I don't want us to think like, oh, our feelings aren't true because we're on day 18 and like that's no longer valid, but like, is this something that like we've been holding in? Um, when I worked at an eating disorder facility, we had this rose ceremony that we would do. And it was about if we were getting our cycle back, we would take a red rose. If we hadn't got our cycle back, because many people, when we have disordered eating, we lose our menses at some point, um, whether a certain body weight or malnutrition. Um, we just no longer have regular periods. And so being able to understand the impact of what it was like to no longer have that menses. And like maybe that was a protective piece for us. Maybe we had something that we weren't wanting to feel with those feelings because we had a traumatic experience with that. And being able to understand where all of those different pieces come into play, right? This is about hormones, but maybe it is because we don't want to have hormones. We don't want to have those feelings that hormones can make us feel inside, right? And so the more that we start listening to this intuition, right? When we start talking about it, going back to every coach should talk about this, I also know the ways not to say it. So I was during this rose ceremony once, right? And one of my clients at the time, we were having some big feelings. And I was like, wow, this feels like a lot different than we were feeling a couple days ago. Like, do you think like maybe we might be like picking a red rose soon? Like maybe our menses is coming back. And she was like appalled that I would like ever. She was like, that is so anti-feminist. Like, how could you? I'm just PMSing. Like, that's all it is. Like, you're just saying, like, I didn't have the, like, and I was like, no, like, I do. I think your feelings are valid. I think this is a blessing that we have. I think that we, as estrogen dominated brains, we get this practice every month to be like, doesn't matter. You can't like store those feelings anymore. They're gonna come out, right? They're true feelings that maybe we have been suppressing, that maybe like our coworker has been driving us up the wall, and maybe this one day it just like got to our last nerve, but maybe it also helps us like get the courage to say something to him because that hormonal shift. But if
Mhm.
we can start to understand like how that piece is also impacting us underneath, then our coach, our therapist, our doctors, our prescribers, right? So let's talk about PMDD. We know that PMDD is a
You want
shift,
to let
is
people know what that stands for? I know what it
yes,
stands
premenstrual dysphoric disorder,
for.
right? So it's when we start feeling dysphoric. And dysphoric maybe also comes with negative thoughts towards ourselves that can come with self-harm. It can come with suicidal ideation. And we have lots of science that unfortunately still hasn't caught up to like understanding exactly what's going on. But we do often, a lot of the hypothesis is around the progesterone switch around this time, that maybe we actually have a condition where the progesterone is not helping calm us. It's kind of our body's reacting pretty negatively towards it. Um, I have a client that I have several clients, actually, not just one client. We have several. I have several that I work with on this, especially around PMDD and when we have suicidal ideation or self-harm. That I'm going to come back to prescribers. If we understand this, our medications are also going to be absorbed differently in our body. Our insulin, let's come back to our insulin, is different. Our insulin helps with digestion and all different kinds of things as well. And so our bodies absorb things differently. If we're looking at this and we have PMDD, this is where we also have research increasing our SSRIs or SNRIs or some of our medication during this time is really helpful to be able to understand that it's not just we're going to take the same amount of medication every part of the month, is that we might increase some of that medication during that time of the month. So we can make medication changes. But many of my clients, I'm going to come back to just knowing that that is what is happening and that it's not this like different version of themselves that like is uncontrollable or just comes out of nowhere. Like why is it all of a sudden that like I was doing okay? I have a client that was in IOP. I was doing okay those first couple weeks. Why all of my sudden just like that Friday I just everything switched. And they were trying to figure, is it because I'm leaving IOP? Is it because like something happened? And she was like, nothing happened. I'm just crazy. I was like, oh, I don't like, let's like back up. And because I talk so much about cycles, I was like, I think, wouldn't that have been like around this time period? And we had to like go back because we're not tracking yet. And I was like, okay, let's start tracking to see, is this what happens? And she's like, but what if it's not? And I was like, but what if it is? What if all along we've been like, we just don't know why, and maybe it is, and it might not be that, but like, what if there is some sort of pattern? Again, I like patterns. I like helping people see their patterns. And this is a pattern that I think so often, us estrogen dominated people can feel like, how come I felt so differently last week? Whether it's hunger, whether it's sleep, whether it's body image, whether it's mood, suicidal ideation, like because, and we're supposed to. And if we understood that we're supposed to, and that like it's not something to try and make go away, but something to lean into. I'm more creative during this time. Doesn't mean I can't work the last 2 weeks. I still have stuff. I still see clients. It's not like I'm like I shut down my business for 2 weeks, although sometimes I wish I could, right? Like, but maybe I don't work on my creative projects. Maybe I don't, expect myself to do the same when I'm at my Pilates class. Maybe it is that like I just don't want to go to Pilates during this time. And maybe it's not because I'm on my period, but maybe it's because I just feel irritable, or maybe I need to go because I feel irritable, right? Like, but if we listen to our body specifically, it reduces shame, it reduces this like how confusion, let's talk about anxiety. Let's talk about estrogen. Like we might feel our anxiety. How come was it last week? I felt so good, and the next week I don't.
What would you mentioned perimenopause, and I
Mhm.
know a lot of women in that stage, so they're going through these phases where they're skipping their menstruation phase.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and then even throughout the month, it's inconsistent.
Right, right. So with this, I'm still going to say let's track. My tracker that I'm making goes 40 days. I know some people we still have to go longer, but that's just because I still want us to at least give some of us, that maybe are taking 6 weeks in between. Maybe we are, and maybe it's 3 months in between when we're, perimenopause is mess in there. But let's come back to estrogen. Estrogens are confidence boosting. So this might also be where maybe we're starting to not feel as good about ourselves. Maybe progesterone also shifts during this time. So our digestion, our bloating, our bodies actually shift during the ways that it processes food during this time. Um, Maybe we're having, I find it quite interesting. I just had a physical trainer that I love following, and she was talking about, the studies around perimenopause and divorce rates around the ways that estrogen I like to think of as kind of like our caregiving hormone. And so as perimenopause happens and our caregiving part happens, it's not that our brains are different, it's that the ways that estrogen going down are going to kind of soften that and maybe not want to clean up everybody's mess or doesn't want to tolerate the behaviors that have been going on in a marriage that maybe they have felt unseen. And so, as we see that estrogen decline, we can also understand that that is part of why we might be having like a midlife crisis. Is I'm going to say the estrogen is dipping, and we're starting to see ourselves shift differently in values or the ways that we have, maybe been okay with managing, all the different things of emotional labor, let's say in a traditional heterosexual relationship, in that assigned female estrogen dominated brain. And maybe around 40s and mid 40s, we're like, I need you to step up a little bit more. Come on. Like, and maybe that is that space of the estrogen kind of going down and understanding that, and also not saying that maybe our testosterone driven partners in this scenario get off the hook because it's just me shifting, and be like, oh, no, you don't have to do the things. It's just my brain different. But also understanding that is a different dynamic relationship. And maybe we need to address that in couples. Maybe we need to talk about how I've maybe felt this way, but I haven't shared it with you. I haven't shared all the burden that I've been holding in right now. And maybe we do need to talk about how that shift in my brain is also going to come to the counterpart testosterone as we also go through. We also have andropause. Andropause is kind of similar to menopause. Menopause is when we stop, our estrogen really declines and we no longer have our menses. Andropause is the slow decline of testosterone. And this is where we also might see behavioral changes of grandpa just seems so much kinder. Like, grandpa's a different guy than he was when he was younger, is often, I'll hear versions of this, of like, he just was, he was a different, and grandchildren might see this very softer version of grandpa. This is also the ways that I can see testosterone ignite the part of the brain that is going to, as we're declining testosterone, it's going to allow the more part of the brain to see outward, where testosterone is going to be a little bit more of an inward type of hormone. It's going to help propel things, testosterone's drive. And so as we have less drive, maybe we're also seeing, let's come back to disordered eating. Maybe we see somebody with a testosterone driven brain around their 50s maybe start developing an eating disorder. Maybe there is part of the testosterone is declining, so we're wanting more food, or the cortisol is declining, and maybe we have less energy, so we're working out less, and so body image is starting to shift. We're feeling that different shift in our muscle tone, and so as clinicians or as individuals, we can start noticing, okay, maybe it's not just about the disordered eating or the eating disorder brain. And I don't like the eating disorder voice because I think so much more, again, physiologically is something in our body is shifting. And if we understand maybe this individual in our 50s, 60s, there is this identity shift along with this of maybe I can't keep up at the gym or I can't lift as much, but also digestion is going to be shifting and the brain structure is going to be shifting. And so maybe we are seeing more empathy from those individuals. So we can talk about that in couples of, okay, how are our hormones actually shifting the dynamic in our relationship, as well as not just the fact that the kids are out of the house during college of this time period. Maybe it's not just the transitional things. There could even be things into our 50s and 60s, understanding how hormones are shifting our relationships.
Well, I think, and Darcy, it'd be great if you have any kind of questions at this point. We'll kind of pause. Um, that your focus isn't allowing people to have this like excuse like, oh, she's gonna
Yeah.
go murder somebody because she's in this phase, and so it's okay. It's more around acknowledging maybe not making certain decisions or being more compassionate so people aren't spiraling in suicidal ideation because they understand like, oh yeah, sometimes my hormones dip at this part of the month, so
Mhm.
I'm actually going to nurture myself instead of um, yell and beat up myself for not
Yeah.
feeling a certain way.
Yeah. And the relief that often, and this is where maybe we don't have relief. And that's also going to be indication to me in somebody that's cycling, if we are having suicidal ideation every single day of the month, I would want us to run some hormone panels. There is something in there that, but most of the time what happens is it's this like, but I know there's relief that will come in 10 days. I know that like something will shift again and like that feeling will be get put to the side a little bit more and like I'll have this time period that maybe we beef up our coping skills and we work on some things during that time that then will also help us during when we get to that cycle again next month. Maybe we help bring our partners in. Maybe we are talking more in therapy about things or we are planning around that. And so yeah, it just helps gives us the ability to, like you said, I'm definitely not saying there was a college student that was like, what? So my boyfriend like doesn't have, and I was like, no, 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 not saying this. No. And how can we understand what's going on for his development in his brain right now and testosterone and why we might not be seeing eye to eye. I have my mood and moon workbook, but I do joke, someday I'll make, men are from testosterone and women are from estrogen. And that is also my gender binary. Because I still need a new title for this because, I want us to understand, there's lots of in between. And I learned so much from my non-binary folks because I see my folks that maybe are gender affirming that are taking a different hormone. I have learned so incredibly much. I will maybe say my dietitian Jess, and I'm also going to say my clients that I've had the privilege working with, because when I work with those individuals, I see that they don't change who they are, but when we start maybe taking a different hormone than what our bodies had originally, um, our behaviors, our personalities, our feelings, the ways that we emote things, the ways that we feel things. It has given me so much insight into also understanding. When I was talking with a family member this weekend about like, it is quite interesting having a boy and a girl now in my life. I have a daughter and I have a son, and seeing my cousin has a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it is the same house. They have very gender neutral. They're very millennial, have very, all the gender neutral things. And the little girl is taking care of the baby, and the boy is smashing into things and running and chasing the balls and things with wheels. And those aren't being taught to these little kids. I was talking to her about those things I do believe are structurally different in our brains, the ways that ignites testosterone to have these types of things, the ways that estrogen structure our brain differently. But as individuals, if we can understand that about ourselves, about our partners, about our friends, about our bosses, understanding those pieces, I think can even shift the dialogue around, yeah, we're not all the same. And we shouldn't be, especially us cycling bodies. We're not going to have as predictable behaviors.
So we have we have enough time for one question. Darcy, do you have one that's lingering?
I do. So I'm wondering if you have any words of invitation or inspiration for someone who hasn't really been in awareness around their cycle, um, for one reason or many, maybe who's even been really ignoring it as someone who has a cycle. Do you have any words of invitation or inspiration for entering into this? Why it might be important on a personal level, whether all of this, the science, even the relational benefits aren't really appealing to them. Is there anything on a personal level just about them that may give a buy-in for looking at this further, looking inside further?
Yeah. Um, I feel like there was a couple questions in there, and in that,
It's
and I
typical
think
of me.
I love it. And going back to a little bit what Michelle was saying too, of like, oh, that's a lot. Like, where do we begin? Of like, it's not actually a lot. It's so intuitive.
Mm.
once we actually start paying attention to it. And really, it might just be so in my workbook, I ask us not to track more than like 10 things. And even 10 things, I'm like, oh, that still feels like so many things. We're like just one. Like if you're curious about something about yourself, if you just pick one thing, if I'm curious, like why why did I feel so different at the gym last week? Or why couldn't I lift as much? Or why did I eat so differently? Or why was it like I said that thing that like, yeah, I meant it, but like, it didn't like really feel like, oh, I didn't say it in the nicest way. Or like, am I shaming myself about something that I've done? Or if we're just curious about a thing about ourselves, if we're just starting to notice that and we just notice and maybe we put it down in a calendar or we write it in our journal. Again, it doesn't have to be an app that we go by or you have to go buy my workbook, like, or you have to go to these trainings, or I think it's just starting to pay it intuitively, like, what might I be curious about that I want to, that maybe might make sense, or maybe got my ears kind of percolated a little bit around, like, ooh, I wonder if I did like track that is my like are those thoughts around myself around self-harm or those things like are they like do they ever go away? Maybe it's just asking ourselves that like is there ever a time or yeah, maybe it's not as intense, but I'm shaming myself for the last time I had that or the last way I acted on that
Mhm.
type of thing. But I think if we just pick one thing that we might start to want to be curious about, our intuition is going to lead us into understanding a little bit more, and whether that's about our hormones or learning more about whatever other thing might be impacting us. I'm a social worker and I like eco maps, and I think hormones is one of the bubbles on an eco map. And so I think if we're just wanting to get curious about one thing, I think let's try and just see how that might be impacted by our hormones.
I love it. I'm so grateful that you're like shining the light on this. And I know that there's going to be so many people that could probably just go see you to specifically to shine this light on this area. I know you're going to be having this workbook come out soon. We'll
There's
definitely,
all and there's lots of individual. I think of, in our networking group, I think there's a lot of awareness that's coming around this. And so it's exciting because I think I'm talking about this, but so many people are talking about this that I think that it's getting more, it's getting more understanding. And I think the more that we understand it, the more that, yeah, we're going to start shifting cultural different ideologies around understanding ourselves differently, understanding that we might even need different diagnoses based on our cycles. We need different prescriptions, maybe. There's a lot of things that we could do. And my brain is I will hopefully start a revolution in some way in this is that hopefully yeah that we do start to make this not as daunting, that it is just part of like our cultural norm for us to understand these things about ourselves. So
yeah,
there's lots of us on this journey too together. I appreciate you getting to let me have my voice here with your audience to get to share with them.
absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we'll have all your info below and people can contact you directly. And I'm super excited about your workbook coming out. So I'll be tracking you.
Absolutely. Great, thank you.